Welcome. Tonight, we're stepping into a story of mud, reeds, and quiet determination. A story about how a small group of wanderers turned a swampy lake into a city full of life, color, and music. If you enjoy these calm journeys, feel free to like this video and subscribe, but only if it feels right for you. And tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always amazing to see where in the world we're all tuning in from. Thanks for joining. Let's dive right in. They came from the north, from a place wrapped in mist and whispers. Aztlan, the land no map could capture. Imagine a small band of wanderers stepping into the sun. Their feet sore, their eyes hungry for a sign. They carried old stories like warm coals in their hearts, stories about a promised land where an eagle would greet them on a cactus, high above the swampy earth. Every morning, they woke with the sound of water lapping at their canoes. The sky above them was a living painting, shifting from pale dawn pinks to heavy indigo nights filled with stars that seemed close enough to touch. They didn't walk like conquerors, not yet. They moved more like guests in a world that wasn't quite theirs, whispering prayers to the gods of rain and wind, of maize and war. You can almost hear the soft creak of wood, the gentle splash of paddles in shallow water. They ate maize cakes and wild herbs, watched birds circle above, and wondered if they had finally outrun all the ghosts of their past. At night, they would huddle around smoky fires, telling each other about the eagle they were destined to find. "It will come," they said, though sometimes their voices trembled. "It will come." Days turned into seasons. Their feet grew roots in the soft mud, and soon they learned to read the language of the marsh. They knew where to find the strongest reeds, where the frogs croaked loudest at twilight, and where the moonlight painted secret trails on the water. In these in-between spaces, they started to imagine not just survival, but a future. A city rising from the water, shimmering like a mirage. There were children playing with frogs, elders whispering about old gods, and women weaving baskets that smelled of lake reeds. Life moved slowly, like thick honey sliding down a bowl. Every splash, every bird call became part of a new rhythm, a heartbeat echoing across the wetlands. And somewhere deep in their dreams, they still saw that eagle, perched and waiting, calling them forward. But there was more than waiting. There was learning to trap fish with woven baskets, to coax tiny green sprouts from damp soil, to listen for the first hints of rain in the wind's sigh. Sometimes they believed the gods were laughing at them, sending them one hardship after another. Other times they felt chosen, blessed to be the keepers of a secret future. The swamp became a teacher, a mirror reflecting their own doubts and quiet hopes. Every night, the fires burned low and the old stories wrapped around them like warm blankets. They spoke of Aztlan as if it was still right behind them, just beyond the next mist. They teased each other about the eagle. What if he's already here, watching us stumble in the mud? They laughed, not because they felt safe, but because laughter was the only shield against fear. The reeds hissed softly in the breeze, echoing their private jokes. In the mornings, dew dripped from the tips of the reeds like tiny jewels. The children chased herons along the muddy edges, shouting and slipping, while mothers scolded them in gentle voices that carried across the water. You could almost taste the smoky scent of roasted maize drifting from small fires, hear the quiet gossip of neighbors trading fish and seeds. This was not yet a kingdom, not yet an empire, just a fragile cluster of hearts, trying to root themselves in a land that felt more dream than earth. And yet, even then, something was stirring. A quiet certainty began to spread among them, like the first warmth of sunrise on cold skin. They were no longer just wanderers. With every stake driven into the mud, every chinampa planted, every whispered prayer to Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli, they laid down pieces of a future city. It wasn't grandeur they saw yet. It was survival turned into quiet defiance, into a kind of everyday magic. If you listen closely, you might hear it too. The slow heartbeat of a city yet to come, hidden among the croaking frogs and splashing children. That soft thrum that says, "We are still here. We are becoming." And above it all, in some shimmering corner of their minds, the eagle watched, waiting patiently on his cactus throne. Some nights, the elders would tell the old stories of Aslan, of the journeys through endless deserts and forests, of signs that felt like riddles only half understood. They spoke of gods in disguise, of mountains that whispered, of stars that guided them and sometimes led them astray. The children would lean in close, eyes wide, half scared and half delighted. Even the adults listened as if they might hear something new, something they had missed all those years on the road. As the fires burned low, the marsh around them would become a kind of echo chamber. The croaks and rustles became part of the stories, weaving a living soundtrack beneath the words. When the elders spoke of the promised eagle, some would gaze into the darkness, almost expecting to see its silhouette among the reeds. It was not just a story, it was a promise tattooed into their hearts. By day, they kept building. Bit by bit, they learned how to turn mud into solid ground, how to shape the floating gardens that would one day feed thousands. The Chinampas were miracles in slow motion. Rafts of mud, reeds, and willow branches, anchored and layered until they could support maize and squash, chilies and beans. The first green shoots pushing up through the wet earth felt like small victories, proof that life could be coaxed from water and willpower alone. The people moved as a living organism. One woman weaving, another singing, a man carving a canoe, children fetching water or gathering insects for bait. Everything happened at once, and yet there was a deep, unhurried rhythm beneath it all. They teased each other about muddy feet and clumsy fishing skills, trading jokes as easily as fish and maize cakes. Laughter rippled through the air, proof that they were not only surviving but beginning to thrive. Sometimes they held small feasts when a particularly good harvest came in or when someone's daughter married. The smoky scent of roasted fish and steaming tamales drifted across the water, inviting even the shyest neighbors to join. Music echoed in the night, flutes, drums, voices rising together. For a few hours, worries about storms or sickness melted away under starlight and song. On rare, quiet mornings, a hush would settle over the marsh. You could hear the delicate drip of water from paddle tips, the soft plop of fish breaking the surface. These were the moments when someone might look across the shining water and imagine the future rising before them. They dreamed of wooden piers stretching out into the lake, of temples so tall they would scrape the sky, of markets so busy you could smell fruit and roasted cacao from miles away. At times, they must have wondered if the eagle was ever coming. Some days, the heat pressed down like an enormous hand, making every step heavy and every breath thick. Other days, storms rolled in so suddenly that they thought the gods themselves were tossing water from the sky. But always, after each hardship, they got up again. They patched their roofs, replanted their floating fields, told each other that the sign would appear when they were ready. And slowly, they were becoming ready. Ready for more than survival. Ready to turn whispered legends into stone temples and wooden canoes into grand market fleets. Even if they didn't know it yet, the swamp was already teaching them how to build a city. Patient, stubborn, and full of unexpected beauty. If you listen closely to the breeze over the water, you can almost hear them. The soft murmur of families building a future, one reed at a time, with mud-streaked fingers and hearts full of stubborn hope. Somewhere in that chorus, a feathered shadow waited, just out of sight, watching and waiting for its moment to descend. Days turned into seasons, and the marsh began to look less like a wild tangle of reeds and more like a woven tapestry of human hope. The floating gardens stretched further, their green patches glinting in the sun like emerald mosaics. Little by little, the people pushed back the water, claiming more space with each new chinampa, each new platform of mud and willow roots. At sunrise, thin trails of smoke curled into the sky as early fires were lit to prepare morning maize cakes. Mothers hummed to restless babies. Old men sharpened fishing hooks while chatting about water spirits and lost ancestors. You could hear dogs barking in the distance, the splash of a paddle cutting across the lake, and the creak of canoes heavy with reeds and baskets. It was a place alive with small sounds, a living heartbeat echoing across the water. Every family had its corner, marked not by fences but by clusters of tools, drying nets, and piles of reeds waiting to be woven. Women carried bundles of fresh herbs on their backs, while young boys chased each other around half-finished canoes. The whole place felt like a giant, breathing organism, restless, chaotic, but strangely comforting. Even disagreements were woven into this daily dance. A man cursing the stubborn mud that swallowed his sandals, an old woman scolding a child for scaring away her ducks. In the evenings, after the last canoe had come home and the water glowed orange under the sinking sun, the community gathered to share stories and food. Elders recited new omens they had dreamt, adding layers to the collective tapestry of prophecy and legend. Some claimed they saw the eagle in their sleep, wings spread wide as mountains, its gaze sharp enough to pierce through mist and time. Others argued it was just a trick of the mind, a story to keep restless hearts from wandering. Yet no matter the doubts, the dream refused to die. It glowed like an ember, sometimes dim but never truly cold. In these moments around the fire, with tamales steaming and pulque flowing, they were more than wanderers or builders. They were a people on the brink of something vast, a city still hidden beneath layers of mud and reed and whispered prayers. On special nights, dancers would circle the fires, their feet kicking up sparks like stars tumbling from the sky. Flutes and drums joined in, creating a rhythm that felt ancient and brand new all at once. Even the quietest among them would sway, caught in the gravity of the music. Children would mimic the dancers in the shadows, their laughter bubbling up like water from a spring. Through all these songs, feasts, and small miracles, they kept one eye on the horizon. The promised eagle was still out there somewhere, a phantom feather drifting just beyond reach. Some mornings, a hush would fall as someone pointed toward a distant shape against the sky. A bird perhaps, or a piece of cloud catching the dawn light. Hearts would leap, only to fall back gently when the shape dissolved. But they never stopped believing. With every stake driven into the marsh, every seed pressed into the damp soil, they built not just gardens but faith. A quiet faith, woven into each basket and each lullaby, echoing off the lake in ripples that stretched far beyond their small world. If you stand there in your mind's eye, you might feel it too. The waiting, the unspoken promise curling beneath their daily chores. A city was already there, hidden beneath the songs, the laughter, the arguments about fishing nets and reed walls. A city dreaming itself into being, watched from above by a patient eagle perched somewhere only they could see. Morning after morning, the people rose with the mist curling over the lake like a soft gray blanket. As the first light touched the water, it was as if the whole settlement took a slow, shared breath. The marsh glimmered, dew hanging on every blade of grass, tiny jewels that disappeared with the sun's first gentle heat. Each day felt like a small ceremony, a quiet agreement with the world around them. We are here, we will keep building. The children learned early that the lake was both a friend and a challenge. They skipped across narrow wooden walkways, balanced baskets on their heads, and chased fish with laughter that splashed across the morning air. Sometimes they slipped and fell into the cool water, surfacing with wide eyes and gasping giggles. Mothers shook their heads, half scolding and half smiling, because even in this wet chaos, life was growing roots. Fishermen drifted through the morning fog, their silhouettes ghostly and elegant. You could hear the dip of a paddle, the gentle clatter of caught fish against canoe bottoms. Nearby, women bent over chinampas, hands deep in black, fertile mud, planting seeds as though tucking secrets into the earth. Their fingers moved with a kind of quiet reverence, each motion a small prayer for rain, for sun, for life. By midday, the place buzzed like a living hive. The air smelled of roasting maize, wet earth, and the faint sweetness of lake flowers. Traders from nearby shores began arriving in small canoes, offering salt, clay pots, obsidian blades, and bright feathers. Laughter and bargaining rose in cheerful waves. Children darted between visitors, fascinated by shimmering shells and piles of chili peppers stacked like tiny red pyramids. As the sun climbed higher, shimmering waves of heat danced over the lake, turning distant canoes into floating mirages. Some people found shade under simple reed shelters, sipping pulque and swapping stories about gods and ancestors, about fish that got away, or about dreams so vivid they felt like messages. Even the elders sometimes joined in these midday rests, nodding wisely and adding sly jokes that made younger listeners howl with laughter. At dusk, the sky turned into a layered painting of orange, violet, and deepening blue. Fires flickered to life one by one, their reflections shivering on the lake surface. The day's noise softened into a gentle hum, like a lullaby sung by the marsh itself. Here and there, someone strummed a turtle shell, another tapped a small drum. Songs rose slowly, drifting over the water like drifting petals. And through all of this, that promise, that waiting eagle, hovered quietly in every heart. They didn't need to see it every day to believe. The very act of planting, weaving, and fishing was its own kind of worship, a daily dance in honor of a sign not yet seen but deeply felt. Each basket carried to market, each fish grilled over a shared fire, each canoe carved from lake wood. It was all part of a slow, collective heartbeat that whispered, "We are coming, we are becoming." If you pause in that twilight moment, you can almost see it too. The shimmer of the future coiled inside every flickering flame, every whispered story. A city breathing softly, hidden but already alive, waiting for the day it would rise from the reeds and claim the sky. On certain moonlit nights, when the lake shimmered like a bowl of liquid silver, the people felt closest to their gods. You could almost hear the thin veil between worlds crackle and sigh. Shadows played across the water, turning canoes into gliding ghosts and fishermen into silhouettes from an old dream. These were the nights when even the boldest among them spoke in hushed tones, afraid to disturb the magic pooling around them. Elders claimed that spirits drifted across the lake then, whispering secrets only those with pure hearts could hear. Children pressed close to their mothers, peeking out from under woven blankets, wide-eyed and shivering with excitement. A distant drum might echo across the marsh, soft and steady like a heartbeat in the dark. Every ripple, every breeze felt charged, as if each movement carried a hidden message from the gods. During these nights, the women often left offerings at the water's edge. Tiny bundles of flowers, bits of maize, or drops of pulque poured carefully into the lake. The gestures were small but heavy with meaning, tiny bargains struck in the moonlight. In return, they hoped for gentle rains, strong harvests, and protection against illness and storms. In the morning, the world felt renewed, as if the lake itself had whispered blessings into the soil overnight. The chinampas sparkled under the dew, and the people moved through their tasks with an extra softness in their steps. Babies giggled in reed cradles, and elders hummed old songs while weaving baskets that smelled of wet earth and lake reeds. As weeks turned to months, they expanded further into the water, pushing their chinampas outward like fingers stretching into the unknown. They built new walkways, stronger homes, and larger canoes. The settlement began to look less like a scattered camp and more like the bones of a real city, hidden under layers of green and blue. Markets grew busier, music drifted farther, and gossip spread like sparks on dry grass. Stories of the eagle kept them anchored. Even skeptics, those who had begun to doubt in the long years of wandering, found themselves drawn into the shared dream. Maybe the eagle wasn't a single bird at all, they began to say. Maybe it was every moment they chose to stay, every seed they planted, every night they dared to imagine temples rising from the mud. At festivals, you could see this hope take shape in painted faces and feathered headdresses, in dancers who moved like wind and fire. Drummers set the rhythm that seemed to echo deep into the bones of the earth, a pulse older than memory. Young lovers exchanged secret glances in the shadows, children played games that mirrored battles of old, and elders watched it all with tired eyes that still sparkled with mischief. And so they stayed, through sunburnt afternoons and bone-soaking rains, through feasts and funerals, through laughter and arguments and quiet nights under drifting stars. Each day, the city grew not just in size, but in spirit. Every splash of a paddle, every gust of wind in the reeds, every child's scream of delight wove them closer together. Stand there in your mind for a moment. Feel the damp boards underfoot, the smoky warmth of cooking fires on your skin, the sweet ferment of pulque on your tongue. Hear the murmur of countless small dreams turning into something larger than themselves. All around you, a city is breathing. It doesn't roar yet. It whispers, it waits. But soon, so very soon, it will rise and sing to the skies. As the seasons turned, the settlement began to breathe with a rhythm all its own. New families arrived from distant lands, bringing stories of other lakes, other gods, other lost homes. They came with bundles on their backs and hopeful eyes, weaving themselves into the ever-growing tapestry of life on the water. Each newcomer added a fresh note to the symphony. New fishing techniques, new seeds, new songs that curled into the night like drifting smoke. Day by day, the chinampas multiplied like green stepping stones stretching into the lake. From above, it might have looked like a giant, emerald puzzle floating on a mirror of sky. Up close, each island pulsed with activity. Women bent over young maize plants, children chasing dragonflies, men shaping canoes that would one day glide silently across the moonlit water. The air often smelled of smoke and sweet sap, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the sharp clack of obsidian tools. Dogs barked from the edges of walkways, and old men argued about which fish traps worked best while balancing precariously on narrow planks. These arguments were often resolved over cups of pulque, the frothy, slightly sour drink that loosened tongues and stitched new friendships. At night, the community gathered in circles around flickering fires. Someone would start a song, and soon others joined, weaving harmonies that rose into the starlit sky. Faces painted with ash and ochre glowed in the firelight, eyes bright with stories older than memory. Between verses, children dozed against their mother's legs, their dreams filled with feathered serpents and golden fields. In these moments, even the oldest fears seemed to soften. The marsh that once threatened to swallow them became an ally, a cradle for their growing city. Every canoe paddle that sliced the water, every seedling that broke the muddy surface, became a small promise to the future. They had stopped running. They had stopped wandering. Slowly, they were becoming rooted not just to the land but to each other. Some claimed to see omens in the dance of herons at dawn or in the way the smoke curled from morning fires. A fisherman swore he saw an eagle's reflection in the lake one misty sunrise, its wings spread wide across the shimmering surface. News of such visions spread quickly, carried in whispers from chinampa to chinampa, stoking the quiet fire in every heart. And so the people continued, through nights thick with fog and days bright enough to make the water glitter like scattered gems. They planted, they sang, they argued, they loved. Each sunrise brought new challenges, storms that tore at the floating fields, illnesses that swept through reed houses, unexpected shortages of fish. Yet each obstacle wove them tighter together. Each hardship added another layer to their shared spirit. If you close your eyes and listen carefully, you might still hear it now. The splash of a paddle in the dark, the low hum of a morning song, the rustle of reeds in a soft night breeze. A city dreaming beneath the stars, not yet finished, but alive in every breath and heartbeat. A city waiting for the eagle to finally land and call its name into the sky. They say that once you put your first pole into the mud, you stop being a wanderer. That first moment, when the reeds part and the mud accepts your stake, is like a quiet marriage to the land. The Aztec people felt this shift deep in their bones as they began turning their floating gardens into something grander. They were no longer just surviving on small chinampas. They were dreaming of streets, temples, and marketplaces rising from the water. The first permanent structures were humble, simple platforms, barely high enough to escape the lake's seasonal floods, woven from reeds and layered with mud. But to the people, they were more than shelter. They were seeds of permanence, each hut a small declaration that they had finally stopped running. Soon, these reed homes clustered together like floating villages, connected by narrow, wobbly walkways that glistened with morning dew. Each day began before sunrise, with the low call of conch shells echoing across the water. Workers rose in the dark, rubbing sleep from their eyes, stretching stiff shoulders before picking up tools. Families set out in canoes to gather fresh mud, reeds, and willow branches to strengthen their chinampas. Women carried baskets heavy with maize and beans to early markets, their reflections shimmering beside them in the dawn light. The gods watched all this with hungry eyes. Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war, demanded constant attention. Offerings of food, flowers, and even small animals became part of the morning rituals, little bargains to keep the sun rising and the lake calm. Sometimes, darker offerings followed, whispered sacrifices at night, the lake swallowing secrets under the cover of moonlight. It was a balance of fear and faith, of love and duty. By midday, the settlement echoed with dozens of voices. Merchants shouting prices, children laughing, dogs barking at flocks of white herons. Smoke curled from cooking fires, carrying the sweet smell of roasting maize, chili, and fish. Near the market centers, small altars began to appear, adorned with feathers, stones, and little clay figures that seemed to watch everyone passing by. Even the most skeptical traders would pause to drop a bean or whisper a quick prayer before moving on. Young boys practiced throwing spears at reed targets, while girls weaved flower crowns to sell or trade. Every day felt like a festival of movement. New paths were built, new chinampas extended, more mud carried and piled. The air buzzed not just with work but with possibility, a shared excitement that maybe, just maybe, they were building more than huts. Maybe they were laying the bones of a city that would one day rival the stars. In the evenings, the people gathered to tell stories of future temples so tall that gods might reach down to touch them. They imagined wide causeways stretching across the water, great markets filled with cacao, jade, and turquoise, and plazas echoing with drums and laughter. Their dreams painted the night sky brighter than any torchlight. Listen closely and you can almost hear their hearts pounding. Not just from labor, but from hope. Every mud-smeared child, every bent old fisherman, every proud mother carrying her first harvest, felt the quiet drumbeat of something larger than themselves. The reeds still whispered, the lake still mirrored the stars, but now, among those reflections, you could see the shimmering outline of a city being born. By the time the first sturdy altars rose above the marsh, the people had already begun calling themselves more than wanderers. They were builders now, artists and dreamers with muddy knees and sunburned cheeks. Their world transformed daily, each sunrise revealing new platforms, new walkways, new layers of life. You could almost feel the ground solidifying beneath their feet, the swamp slowly surrendering its secrets to human hands. The chinampas stretched farther and farther into the lake, creating a green labyrinth of floating fields and winding canals. From a canoe gliding through the narrow channels, the view looked like a woven tapestry of emerald squares and glimmering water veins. The smell of damp earth mingled with the sweet scent of flowers blooming on tiny island gardens. Bright marigolds, red chilies, golden maize stalks. They formed a mosaic of color that seemed to ripple and dance under the sun. In these new neighborhoods, the morning market became a heartbeat. Merchants set out clay pots filled with honey, amaranth seeds, and salted fish. Women squatted by piles of squash blossoms and chili peppers, their voices rising in playful arguments over price and quality. Young lovers sneaked shy glances between baskets of cacao beans, pretending to inspect goods while stealing moments of connection. Even old warriors, now slowed by time, wandered through the stalls with feathered cloaks draped loosely over their shoulders, offering blessings or trading advice for a sweet fruit. The builders labored alongside the dreamers. Tall wooden poles began to outline what would one day be temples and meeting halls. With every swing of a hammer and every woven reed mat laid into place, the city took on a new layer of spirit. In the evenings, when the last colors of sunset bled into the lake, they sat around fires and whispered plans for towering pyramids and causeways strong enough to carry armies. Some nights, priests emerged, faces painted in stark black and white, moving like shadows along the water's edge. They carried incense burners that trailed long fingers of sweet smoke into the sky, a signal to the gods above that their children were keeping faith. Small sacrifices of frogs or fish slipped beneath the water's surface, ripples marking each silent promise. Even in the hush of these ceremonies, there was a pulsing excitement, a knowing that each offering was a brick in the foundation of something far greater. The children watched all of this with wide, hungry eyes. They chased each other across unfinished walkways, balanced on reed rafts, and practiced dances with imaginary drums. In their games, they built cities in miniature, tiny replicas of temples and markets drawn with sticks and stones. They argued over who would play the eagle, who would be the priest, who would climb the imaginary pyramid and shout to the stars. Under the moonlight, as adults rested sore muscles and shared bowls of steaming atoll, the city whispered around them. The reeds swayed like silent dancers, and the lake reflected hundreds of small fires that winked like stars on the water. It was in these gentle, tired moments that the people felt the presence of something larger than themselves moving through the dark. They began to dream collectively, of markets where merchants from every corner of the known world would gather, of grand festivals echoing with drums and flutes, of a city that would rise so boldly it would capture the eye of every god. These weren't just hopes. They became blueprints carried in every heartbeat, sketches whispered into the night wind. When dawn returned, gilding the marsh in gold, the builders rose again, shoulders stiff but eyes bright. They knew that every pole planted, every canal dug, every chinampa sown, was another breath in the lungs of their future city. And somewhere above them, hidden in the blush of morning clouds, an eagle watched, patient and silent, waiting for the moment to descend and bless the name they would give to this dream made real. Day after day, the muddy outlines of the future city grew sharper. Wooden stakes rose into the air like thin forest skeletons, slowly filling in with woven reeds and layered mud. Everywhere you looked, there were hands at work. Women weaving mats to line new homes, men pushing canoe loads of fresh mud toward new chinampas, children fetching reeds or carrying jars of water balanced carefully on small heads. The air throbbed with energy. You could hear it in the rhythmic thud of wooden hammers, the hiss of heated stones dropped into water to boil maize, and the echo of laughter bouncing across canals. Every moment felt electric with promise. Traders arrived in narrow canoes laden with obsidian blades, colorful feathers, cacao beans, and salt. They drifted between new markets that sprouted like mushrooms after rain, leaving trails of gossip and excitement behind them. In one corner, a group of elders debated which deities should receive the first formal shrine. Some argued for Tlaloc, the rain god, whose mercy kept the chinampas alive. Others insisted on Huitzilopochtli, the fiery heart of war and the sun, the one who had guided them from Aztlan. Their discussions turned into small ceremonies themselves, complete with smoldering incense and whispered prayers. People gathered around to listen, drawn in by the scent of copal and the gravitas of old voices. As days turned into weeks, the first simple temples began to rise. They weren't yet the towering pyramids of future dreams, but humble platforms where priests offered flowers, fruit, and the occasional drop of blood. These early altars marked a transition in the people's minds. From a wandering tribe surviving in reeds to a community bold enough to invite the gods to stay. Young warriors practiced drills in clearings, their bodies gleaming with sweat, obsidian-tipped spears slicing the air. They shouted chants to build courage and to echo the voices of ancestors long gone. Old warriors watched from shaded spots, offering gruff corrections or nods of silent approval. Women sang songs that wove praise and protection into each young fighter's spirit, a quiet armor stronger than any blade. The children, always watchful, turned these rituals into games. They mimicked spear throws with sticks, invented war dances, and played mock battles that ended in squeals of laughter and splashes into the lake. Every night, as stars claimed the sky, they lay on woven mats and replayed the day's stories in hushed voices. Their dreams carried visions of future greatness. High towers, endless rows of market stalls, and lakes shimmering beneath a city that reached for the heavens. On moonless nights, the settlement felt like a living creature. Fires flickered like eyes across the water, and soft chants drifted like slow breaths. You could almost sense the entire place exhaling together, releasing the worries of the day and inhaling the steady beat of hope. During these dark hours, the priests performed quiet rituals to honor ancestors, coaxing blessings from unseen realms. Each new morning brought new work. Canal walls needed shoring up, fish traps needed mending, and chinampas required endless tending. The women rose first, their hands already moving before sunrise, grinding maize into soft dough and wrapping tamales for the day ahead. The men set out to harvest reeds or paddle far into the lake to hunt ducks and collect eggs. Children scattered like water droplets, chasing tasks or each other, their laughter stitching small bright threads into the city's vast tapestry. Through all these layers of labor and laughter, the vision of the eagle remained. No longer just a distant sign, it had become a presence felt in every heart. People spoke of it as if it hovered just beyond sight, wings spread over their future. And in that unseen shelter, they built on, not just walls and canals, but an identity that shimmered brighter with every sunrise. While the city's skeleton grew, so did its spirit. By now, visitors from distant shores began arriving more frequently, drawn by rumors of a growing settlement that seemed to rise magically from the water. These traders came with woven mats packed with turquoise stones, bright parrot feathers, fine cotton cloths, and obsidian knives so sharp they could split a hair. Their canoes looked like floating treasure chests gliding across the lake's glittering surface. The newcomers marveled at the endless green chinampas and the echoing chants drifting across the water. Many left with stories that would ripple outward like a stone tossed into a pond. Tales of a city being born among reeds, guided by visions and guarded by gods. Each tale carried back to distant valleys and mountains became another thread weaving the Aztecs into the wider fabric of Mesoamerican trade and myth. By day, the canals bustled with noise and color. Women leaned out from reed platforms to call greetings or haggle with canoe traders passing by. Dogs barked from the edges of walkways, and children yelled to each other from one chinampa to the next, their voices carrying across the reflective water like birdsong. The smell of roasting fish mixed with the earthy scent of wet mud and blooming marigolds, creating an aroma that belonged only to this floating dream. In the marketplace, disputes flared and cooled like sudden storms. A woman might accuse a neighbor of selling watered-down atoll or cheating on a basket of beans. An old man would jump into the fray, offering loud and colorful opinions, while others gathered to laugh and toss in their own comments. Yet, beneath all this noise, there was an unspoken understanding that each exchange, each argument, was another brick in the invisible wall binding them together. Meanwhile, builders continued to raise new altars and ceremonial platforms. The first serious attempts at large temples began to take shape, simple but determined structures rising defiantly above the lake's mirror. Each layer of stone or packed earth carried not just weight but intention, an offering to the gods that said, "We are here, and we are not leaving." Priests paced between these new structures, their bodies painted in deep reds and blacks, leaving trails of fragrant copal smoke that curled like ethereal serpents. Young warriors trained tirelessly nearby, their shouts echoing like thunder across the canals. They sparred with wooden swords and obsidian knives, moving with a grace that hinted at future conquests and defenses. Older warriors, eyes sharp and hearts still wild, watched and sometimes stepped forward to demonstrate a new tactic or chant an old war song. You could see pride flicker in their faces, a flame stoked by memory and promise. In quiet moments, when the sun dipped low and the lake turned to molten gold, families gathered on their reed mats to share evening meals. They passed bowls of steaming tamales and roasted maize, telling stories of their ancestors and whispering predictions about the city's destiny. Children listened wide-eyed, stuffing their mouths with food and storing every word like sacred seeds in their hearts. Some nights, a hush would fall so heavy it felt as if the entire city were holding its breath. In those silences, the reeds shivered softly, and the stars reflected perfectly on the lake, doubling the sky. On those rare nights, people swore they could hear the beating wings of the great eagle, sweeping unseen above the water, measuring their courage and patience. They had come so far from the marsh-bound wanderers they once were. Now they stood on the threshold of becoming something greater, a true city, a living legend. Each drop of sweat, each small sacrifice, each whispered prayer was a step closer to that dream. In every corner of the settlement, from the loudest market stalls to the quietest fishing spots, the same silent promise rang clear. They would rise together no matter how long it took. If you lean in close enough, you can almost hear that promise humming in the reeds, waiting for the moment it will burst into song. The settlement no longer felt like a fragile experiment. It pulsed with a heartbeat as steady and deep as the lake itself. Early risers now awoke not to the uncertain hush of a scattered camp, but to the chorus of a growing city. The smell of maize porridge drifted through the air, mixed with the smoke from morning fires and the faint scent of fresh-cut reeds. Everywhere, there was the sound of movement. Paddles splashing, dogs barking, traders shouting as they loaded their canoes for the day. At the center of this bustling energy rose the first proper temple platforms. While simple compared to the towering pyramids that would one day scrape the sky, they already felt sacred. Built with mud bricks and strengthened by wooden beams, these early temples were decorated with painted symbols, swirling serpents, sunbursts, and jaguar spots, each stroke a prayer locked into the walls. Women brought flowers and maize as offerings, children laid small clay figures at the base, and priests whispered chants that drifted like mist into the morning sky. Beyond the temples, causeways started to snake outward, solid paths made from layers of stone and earth that connected the floating city to the distant shorelines. These walkways shimmered under the sun, sometimes submerged during heavy rains, but always reborn stronger afterward. Canoes glided alongside them, their wooden hulls laden with baskets of chili peppers, avocados, woven mats, and obsidian blades. Every arrival from the mainland felt like another heartbeat echoing through the city's veins. In the markets, life swirled with all the color and chaos of a festival. Sellers draped bright textiles over makeshift stalls. Merchants shouted praises of their fish or cacao beans, and healers offered bundles of herbs said to cure everything from fevers to broken hearts. A mother traded a woven basket for a handful of freshwater shrimp, while her son ran off to marvel at a pile of sparkling turquoise stones. Nearby, an elder sat cross-legged, chanting softly over a bowl of steaming atoll, eyes half closed in a trance that seemed to reach back centuries. Children carried rumors as easily as they carried water jars. They whispered of an eagle spotted at dawn, of a glowing figure seen gliding across the lake at night. These stories mixed with laughter, weaving through the canals like drifting petals. Even skeptics found themselves listening, hearts secretly hoping to catch a glimpse of the divine. On festival days, the entire city seemed to glow. Drums thundered from the temple steps, dancers twisted and spun in feathered costumes that turned them into living flames. Musicians played flutes that sounded like the calls of distant birds, and singers raised their voices until they tangled with the wind. Offerings filled the altars, flowers, fruit, amaranth cakes, and precious stones. In rare moments, blood sacrifices were offered too, tiny rivers of crimson meant to feed the gods and keep the sun moving across the sky. When the sun finally fell and the fires took over, the city hummed with exhausted joy. Families gathered under reed canopies to share tamales and stories, leaning against each other in the flickering glow. Some nights, the elders spoke of the old days wandering through dry deserts and thick forests, of losses and small miracles that brought them here. Other nights, they dared to speak of the future, of markets so vast they would rival the stars, of temples that would rise higher than any tree, of warriors and merchants who would carry their name to every shore. By then, the lake itself had become an old friend, a patient guardian that cradled their floating dreams. Its calm surface mirrored the moon, their fires, and perhaps, in secret, the watching eye of the eagle they still waited for. If you stand in that glow, in the hush between drumbeats and laughter, you can almost feel the city inhale. A deep, slow breath, gathering strength before the great shout that would one day announce its true name to the world. As time drifted forward like the slow current beneath their canoes, the city's face transformed again and again. Every season layered new life onto its foundations. Markets expanded until they felt endless, their wooden stalls spilling over with baskets of chilies, salted fish, fragrant herbs, and small, bright fruits that gleamed like jewels under the sun. The air carried the voices of 1,000 small dramas. A woman haggling fiercely for a clay pot, a boy trying to trade a handful of feathers for a small. The canals, once narrow and quiet, turned into living arteries. Traders from distant shores maneuvered their canoes with practiced grace, calling out greetings and jokes as they passed. Canoe traffic jams became a normal sight, with paddlers teasing each other, splashing water in mock frustration, and sometimes stopping altogether to share a cup of pulque before continuing their route. The city no longer whispered. It sang in many voices at once. Above this constant buzz, the temples grew taller, layer by layer. Priests climbed narrow stairs at dawn, carrying incense burners that left long, curling trails of smoke across the pale morning sky. The smell of copal drifted over the markets and canals, binding everyone in a single, invisible thread of devotion. From these heights, the priests looked out over the shimmering lake and the maze of chinampas, whispering to the gods to protect their fragile paradise. Young warriors continued to train in open spaces, their shouts punctuating the daily rhythm like sudden drumbeats. They learned not only how to fight but how to move with grace, their dances echoing the swirl of birds overhead. Each young man carried both a spear and a dream of honor, of conquest, of protecting the fragile green fingers of their floating home. The older warriors watched with knowing eyes, recognizing the spark they once carried in their own chests. Children played in the shallows, turning water lilies into crowns and chasing each other through rows of maize. Their laughter mingled with the low chants of elders who sat weaving baskets, their fingers moving in slow, hypnotic patterns. Stories flowed constantly, slipping from one mouth to another like small, bright fish darting through reeds. Legends of the first wanderers, jokes about the gods' strange appetites, gossip about a neighbor's stubborn canoe. Every tale added a stitch to the living quilt of the city. On certain evenings, the entire settlement paused. As the sun dipped behind the western mountains and painted the lake in sheets of red and gold, everyone turned toward the horizon. In that glowing silence, they believed they could feel the eagle's shadow sweep over them, a silent promise written in the last light of day. The oldest among them would close their eyes and murmur thanks, while the youngest held their breath, wide-eyed and certain they had seen a feather drift down from the sky. After darkness settled, fires flared along the walkways and marketplaces. Families gathered for meals, passing bowls of beans and roasted squash, exchanging quiet smiles and gentle nudges. Elders shared cautionary tales about the price of pride and the weight of divine attention. Parents pressed sticky fingers into children's palms, reminding them to honor the lake, the gods, and each other. The city felt more alive than ever, not just a place of survival, but a pulsing heart that drew in dreams, laughter, and quiet prayers. Every crack of a paddle, every echo of a drum, every whispered blessing under moonlight felt like another heartbeat in a body much larger than any single soul. If you stand there in the glow of the fires, breathing the sweet smoke and listening to the distant splash of a canoe, you might understand it too. The city had stopped waiting for the eagle to arrive. Instead, it had become the eagle's perch itself, strong enough to carry its own destiny into the sky. The morning mists had become old friends by now. They rose from the lake like slow dancers, wrapping the city in a soft, shifting veil before the first rays of the sun pierced through. Each dawn felt like the city was being reborn, its temples and walkways slowly revealed as if by magic. Birds called across the water, and the first market canoes glided silently toward the heart of the city, loaded with dreams and wares. The temples now towered above the chinampas, their painted walls alive with serpents, suns, and jaguars. From high terraces, priests called to the gods, their chants echoing off the water like rolling thunder. Incense plumed into the sky, curling around the rising sun, as if the city itself breathed out a morning prayer. People below paused to listen, hands pressed together or lips moving in silent gratitude. Even traders and warriors, always busy and restless, stood still for those sacred moments. The causeways, once narrow and unsure, now stretched boldly across the lake like strong arms embracing distant shores. Merchants from faraway valleys arrived in steady streams, bringing cacao beans, turquoise, rubber balls, and shimmering shells. The city's markets grew into living labyrinths where every corner offered a new scent, a new color, a new whisper of distant lands. Children darted through the stalls, trailing laughter and curiosity, their eyes hungry for shiny treasures and secret tastes. At midday, The heat shimmered over the water, turning the city into a living mirage. Builders hauled heavy stones along the causeways, their backs glistening with sweat, voices rising in rhythmic chants to keep time. Women prepared meals in the shade, stirring large clay pots that sent spicy, smoky clouds into the air. The steady hammer of work mixed with the softer rhythms of daily life, the slap of dough against a mat, the rustle of weaving reeds, the soft swish of paddles returning from morning harvests. Warriors trained relentlessly in open courtyards, their obsidian blades slicing the air with fierce grace. Each clash of practice weapons echoed like distant thunder, a reminder to all that peace was never guaranteed and vigilance was sacred. At night, these same warriors sat cross-legged around fires, eyes reflecting the flames, sharing stories of ancestors and imagining distant conquests. The young ones soaked up every word, eager to carry forward the city's honor. Children continued to create their own tiny empires in the mud, building miniature temples and canals, staging grand ceremonies for frogs and captured insects. Their games mirrored the adults' hopes, each small construction an echo of a future city yet to come. Elders watched from the shadows, their faces split between smiles and wistful silence, remembering when they too had been dreamers with muddy hands and bright eyes. When festivals arrived, the city transformed completely. Drumbeats rolled across the lake, shaking the stars from their hiding places in the water's reflection. Dancers spun in feathered headdresses, their feet a blur of motion, faces painted like suns and moons. The smell of roasted maize and sweet cacao drifted through the streets, drawing everyone toward the central plazas. Songs soared above the rooftops, blending with the cries of night birds and the whisper of reeds in the evening wind. Under the moon's soft gaze, priests climbed temple steps bearing offerings, each movement slow and deliberate. At the summit, they raised their hands to the sky, calling the gods to witness the city's strength and devotion. In these shimmering moments, every heart below beat as one, a tidal wave of shared faith and pride rolling silently across the water. Standing in that moonlit crowd, you might feel it too, the pulse of a city no longer simply surviving, but rising boldly into its own legend. The eagle was no longer just a sign to wait for. It had become the city's soul, woven into every chant, every stone, every whispered promise. And somewhere above, perhaps beyond the stars themselves, something listened and smiled, knowing that the city was ready to finally shout its name to the world. As days stretched into years, the city's heartbeat only grew stronger. Markets pulsed like living creatures, bursting with bright fabrics, fragrant herbs, shimmering shells, and obsidian blades sharp enough to catch the sun. Traders came from every corner of the world, they knew, mountain valleys heavy with jade, coastal towns smelling of salt and fish, and jungle settlements that glowed with the color of exotic feathers. People moved through this kaleidoscope with a confidence that once would have seemed impossible. They no longer glanced nervously at the horizon or whispered about distant omens. Now they bargained loudly, laughed freely, and sang songs that bounced off the temple walls and drifted across the lake. Children ran in packs, weaving between stalls, sometimes vanishing for hours into secret corners of the city to trade marbles or chase dragonflies among the reeds. At dawn, the temples loomed against a sky washed in soft pink and orange. Priests moved along the high terraces, their painted faces hidden behind masks of jaguars and eagles. They swung incense burners in slow arcs, leaving ghostly trails of smoke that curled around the first rays of light. Below, people paused mid-step, heads bowed, as if the entire city was breathing in one shared rhythm. Mornings belonged to labor and worship, but afternoons belonged to the small dramas of daily life. Lovers slipped away to quiet alcoves shaded by flowering vines, whispering secrets and carving names into wooden beams. Grandmothers scolded young boys for sneaking extra sweet maize cakes, only to slip them one more piece when no one was looking. Old warriors sat in doorways, their stories drifting into the warm air like lazy wasps, each memory a spark that lit up young faces gathered around their knees. As the sun reached its zenith, workers returned to Chinampas shimmering under the relentless light. Canoes floated between green islands, paddles dipping in and out of water that glowed like polished jade. Every patch of land told a story. A woman's maize field that fed her entire clan. A fisherman's hidden traps that yielded the fattest eels. A child's small garden of flowers meant to honor the rain gods. Each inch of soil had been coaxed from the lake by patient hands. Each drop of water a gift borrowed from the gods. When the heat finally began to wane, the city came alive in a new way. Drums called out from the temple steps, summoning dancers whose feathered capes fanned out like flames in the fading light. Merchants wrapped up the last of their goods. Children returned home sticky and tired, and the scent of roasting squash and steaming tamales spread through the air. Fires flickered to life across rooftops and walkways, turning the city into a constellation of orange stars floating above the dark lake. In these twilight hours, elders shared visions of the future, of new causeways stretching even farther across the water, of more temples climbing toward the stars, of armies strong enough to protect every chinampa and every child's laugh. Younger listeners sat wide-eyed, feeling their hearts swell with possibility. They carried these stories into their dreams, letting them bloom and twist into futures even brighter than the firelight. Meanwhile, the old gods listened. In the rustle of reeds, in the ripple of fish beneath canoes, in the soft thump of dancers' feet, they heard the city's prayer. And somewhere high above, the eagle hovered, no longer a distant prophecy, but a constant companion stitched into every heartbeat and breath. If you find yourself wandering through these imagined streets tonight, close your eyes and listen. You'll hear laughter mixed with drumbeats, the soft hush of a paddle gliding through moonlit water, the whisper of a promise that still echoes across centuries. In that moment, you'll feel it. The city's soul, bright and alive, waiting to rise and greet the stars. As the moon continued its slow dance across countless nights, the city matured into a force that pulsed beyond the lake's borders. Visitors began to arrive not only to trade but to marvel. They spoke in hushed tones of the floating gardens that shimmered like emerald carpets and the temples that scraped at the clouds, alive with painted feathers and blood-red murals. From mountain passes and coastal paths, rumors spread like wildfire. A city born on water, guided by an eagle's silent flight. Each dawn, the conch shells called the faithful to the temples. Waves of people moved through narrow canals and across causeways, their steps measured and solemn. At the temple stairs, lines formed early, each pilgrim holding offerings. Bright feathers, bundles of maize, flowers wet with dew, and precious stones that glowed like captured starlight. The air trembled with the soft hum of prayers, as if the city itself exhaled in gratitude. Priests performed rituals that bound heaven to earth. From the topmost platforms, they lifted hands to the sun, faces streaked with sacred pigments, their bodies moving in slow, powerful gestures. Smoke curled and danced around them, carrying songs to gods unseen. Below, the people watched with heads bowed or eyes locked to the sky, hoping to glimpse a divine reply in the drifting clouds or the sudden flight of a heron. By midday, the city flowed like a river at flood. Merchants shouted across crowded walkways, baskets of cacao beans and chili peppers balanced on bent backs. Fishermen returned with nets heavy and dripping, calling out boasts about the size of their catch. Children, unstoppable as the sun, darted under legs and behind stalls, giggling as they stole figs or jostled each other into shallow canals. Families gathered in shaded courtyards to share meals. Bowls of steaming beans and roasted maize passed around in gentle hands. Elders told stories about the first days on the marsh, of the soft mud that swallowed ankles and the long nights listening for the eagle's cry. They spoke of those who had fallen, hunters lost to storms, builders claimed by sudden illness, their names remembered like sacred echoes. Each tale folded into the fabric of the present, another stitch holding the city's spirit together. Young warriors trained at the city's edges, their bodies a blur of muscles and obsidian edges under the hot sun. Their chants rose and fell like waves, pushing each other toward sharper reflexes and stronger hearts. Between drills, they shared jokes, small pieces of roasted fish, and secret dreams of future glories beyond the lake. Even in their laughter, there was an undercurrent of fierce loyalty. a promise to protect the city's breath at any cost. At dusk, the city transformed again. Fires flared along the canals, their reflections turning the lake into a broken mirror of orange stars. Musicians tuned flutes and drums, dancers tied on elaborate headdresses made of shimmering quetzal feathers. As music rose, feet pounded on wooden platforms, and hands clapped in wild rhythms that called to the moon and beyond. The entire city seemed to sway in unison, a single living body dancing beneath the heavens. On these nights, when the air hummed with song and the fires roared, some swore they saw a dark shape circle high above, wings wide and patient. Children pointed upward, gasping, while elders nodded knowingly, seeing not just a bird but a promise kept. Even skeptics fell silent, feeling the tug of something older than fear or faith, something that curled around every heart and whispered of destiny. If you find yourself there, leaning over a canal, the scent of flowers and roasted maize thick around you, music slipping into your bones, you might feel it too. That rising, trembling breath of a city no longer waiting to become. A city that had claimed the eagle's gaze and turned it into a mirror of its own fierce, unstoppable soul. By now, the city had outgrown even the wildest dreams of its founders. What began as fragile rafts of mud and reeds had transformed into a labyrinth of stone, color, and sound. Every morning, new layers of life unfolded like petals opening to the sun. Fresh causeways stitched the lake together, drawing travelers from distant lands like bees to a blossoming flower. From above, the city looked like a giant mosaic floating on the shimmering surface, alive with flickering fires and moving shadows. People moved through the markets with a confidence that came only from belonging to something bigger than themselves. The air was thick with the smell of grilled fish, burning copal, and ripe fruit. Women in embroidered cotton dresses carried baskets overflowing with marigolds and maize. Merchants held out jade beads and bright feathers, shouting prices in voices roughened by years of bartering and laughter. Children tugged at sleeves, begging for sweet amaranth cakes or bright parrot feathers to weave into their H. In the temple plazas, musicians played rhythms that echoed through stone walls and into the hearts of dancers spinning in bursts of red and gold. Each step seemed to beat against the ground like a thunderclap, a promise that the city would endure any storm. Priests moved among the crowds, blessing babies, accepting offerings, and murmuring prayers that smelled of earth and stars. The great temples rose ever higher, their stairways crawling with worshippers who moved upward like ants, each one carrying hopes and secrets. At the summit, priests lifted arms to the sky, voices breaking into wild chants that split the morning air. From these heights, the city sprawled below like a living tapestry, every canal and causeway pulsing with movement, each rooftop catching pieces of dawn light. Beyond the plazas, in quieter corners, families gathered around low fires. Grandfathers told stories of Aslan and the long journey south, weaving tales of lake spirits and eagle shadows into lessons about patience and courage. Grandmothers hummed old songs while they ground maize, their hands moving with the certainty of generations. Nearby, children played at building tiny pyramids, shouting and laughing as they pretended to call down rain or command the sun to rise. Young warriors sharpened their obsidian blades, practicing moves taught by ancestors whose names were still whispered during moonlit rituals. Between strikes and stances, they glanced at the city rising around them, each stone a testament to what they were bound to protect. Their laughter echoed across training grounds, mingling with the calls of herons and the low hum of busy markets. As dusk arrived, lanterns flickered along canal edges, turning the water into ribbons of fire. Families drifted home by canoe, their laughter and chatter carrying across the lake in soft waves. Smoke curled from rooftop kitchens, carrying the scent of simmering stews and roasted peppers into the night sky. From temple tops, priests lit great fires that glowed like stars, guiding home late travelers and reminding all that the gods watched even after sunset. On festival nights, the entire city seemed to tilt toward the moon, every drumbeat a heartbeat shared by thousands. Dancers whirled so quickly their feathers blurred into bright halos, and voices rose in chants that wrapped the city in an invisible blanket of power. It was in these moments, when the earth shook under stomping feet and the air pulsed with song, that the city felt closest to the gods. You could almost see the eagle's wings spreading across the stars, each feather carrying a prayer or a dream. If you stand in one of those narrow alleyways tonight, pressed between the scent of maize and the sound of distant flutes, you might feel the ground vibrate beneath you. You might sense the city's breath on your neck, warm and ancient, urging you to look up, to see the moon's reflection shivering in the water, and to imagine an eagle soaring just beyond your reach. In that moment, you'll understand. This was no longer just a city on a lake. It was a living, breathing legend, calling out to the gods and echoing across time. Over time, the city learned to wear every season like a different robe. In the rainy months, the lake swelled and lapped at the canal edges, turning walkways into floating ribbons. Canoes glided easily between homes, and children cheered as if the entire city had become one big playground. Rain drummed against reed roofs and filled clay jars, while the gods' voices boomed in distant thunder. In dry times, the sun painted everything in shimmering waves of heat, and the canals shrank to narrow veins of grey. Yet no matter the season, life thrived in a rhythm as natural as a heartbeat. Morning saw women gathered by the water, washing maize and gossiping about neighbors' secret romances, or which warrior looked strongest during last night's festival. Elderly men lounged nearby, weaving baskets or mending nets, their fingers moving as steadily as the lake breeze. Laughter rippled outward, echoing off temple walls and drifting down quiet alleys. In the markets, the exchange of goods felt like a daily dance. A woman traded bright feathers for cacao, a boy bartered a fish for a tiny obsidian blade, a grandmother exchanged woven mats for fragrant herbs to cure her aching joints. Even arguments carried a melody, sharp but never cruel, as if every voice understood it was part of a larger song that held the city together. Temples loomed above, guardians of the city's soul. On special days, priests led processions that wound through every main street, past flower-draped altars and under arches of woven reeds. Incense curled into the sky, mingling with chants so powerful they seemed to pull the clouds closer. At the climax, offerings were lifted high, baskets of flowers, fruits, sometimes even shimmering jade, and prayers surged upward like 1,000 bright birds released at once. The young warriors were always watching. They moved through the city like restless shadows, learning not only to fight but to understand the balance between force and grace. Their eyes caught every flicker of motion, every whispered rumor. Some nights, they gathered on temple steps, obsidian blades resting across their knees, sharing dreams about future raids and how they might one day be immortalized in song. Between boasts, they offered each other roasted squash or sweet tamales, the glow of braziers dancing. Beyond the warriors, the old storytellers kept the city's memory alive. By moonlight, they gathered children around low fires, weaving tales of the first muddy steps onto the lake, of reeds that swallowed men whole, and of the eagle that first perched on a cactus, signaling destiny's arrival. The children listened with wide eyes, sometimes shivering, sometimes giggling when a joke slipped between solemn lines. These stories braided past and present together so tightly that no one ever truly felt alone. At twilight, the lake turned to silver glass. Canoes drifted home slowly, their paddlers humming tunes that matched the rhythmic slap of water against wood. Fires sparked to life along every causeway, their glow flickering in the eyes of families gathered to eat and tell the day's small triumphs and stumbles. Above it all, the temples stood watch, their peaks catching the last light of the dying sun. Festival nights turned all this into a living dream. Drums pounded like 1,000 heartbeats, feet struck the ground with thunderous joy, and voices soared high enough to brush the stars. Every costume shimmered with feathers and beads, each dancer spinning their own prayer into the dark. In those hours, no one thought of loss or fear. There was only the music, the fire, the feeling of being carried by something far greater than any single life. And if you stood in the middle of it all, sweat on your skin, maize sweetness on your tongue, moonlight tangled in your hair, you might understand what it meant to belong to a city that had once been just a whisper in a marsh. A city that learned to rise with every breath, to sing with every heartbeat, and to stretch its spirit so high that even the gods leaned down to listen. And so, as years blurred into each other like the ripples across the lake, the city stood stronger than ever. It became a living promise, a breathing memory of every muddy footstep, every whispered prayer, every stubborn dream that had floated over the water like a drifting petal. By now, no one doubted the city's destiny. Even the most skeptical traders, who had once arrived with wary eyes and half-hearted offerings, found themselves woven into its heartbeat, unable to leave. The temples towered higher, their steps worn smooth by generations of worshippers climbing in barefoot devotion. Each stone carried a story, a love confessed under moonlight, a child's first whispered prayer, a warrior's final vow before battle. From the topmost altars, priests watched the sun rise and set in a constant rhythm, marking time not just for the city but for all the lives that beat beneath their gaze. Down below, life poured through the canals and streets like sweet pulque. Markets exploded with color and sound. The shine of jade beads, the flash of bright feathers, the earthy smell of fresh tamales steaming in large clay pots. Children tugged at mothers' sleeves, pointing at carved toys or sweets wrapped in maize leaves. Laughter rose in gusts, drifting over rooftops and curling around temple columns. Every sunrise brought new reasons to gather and new stories to share. At midday, workers rested in the shade of reed canopies, swapping gossip and trading small treasures. A smooth shell for a carved bead, a bright feather for a handful of cacao beans. Elders watched with soft eyes, seeing in these exchanges echoes of 1,000 mornings past. As dusk painted the lake in gold and purple, the city exhaled in a collective sigh. Fires flickered to life along the canals, turning water into molten mirrors. Musicians tuned their flutes, and the first drumbeats sent vibrations through the wooden walkways, stirring even the most tired bones into gentle swaying. Families gathered on rooftops and by fire pits, sharing food and memories as the stars slowly unveiled themselves above. On festival nights, the city transcended itself. Dancers adorned in quetzal feathers and shimmering beads moved like living prayers, their bodies writing poems against the night sky. Drums roared from temple plazas, the rhythm so strong it seemed to ripple straight into the lake's depths. Sparks from fire pits rose into the darkness like tiny souls taking flight, each one a small wish or blessing sent skyward. In these sacred moments, you could almost hear the echo of every ancestor who had ever dared to dream this city into being. The marsh wanderers who once shivered in the cold, the builders who first balanced mud on fragile rafts, the first child who laughed while falling into the reeds. They all lived on in each drumbeat, each swirl of a dancer's foot, each shared smile by moonlight. And if you stood there, on a temple terrace or among the crowd on a floating walkway, you might feel a hush fall over you. The city would seem to breathe with you, as if sharing an ancient secret just for a moment. You might look up to see an eagle gliding against the stars, wings stretched wide, a final blessing whispered across the centuries. The city was no longer waiting for a sign. It had become the sign, a testament to resilience, faith, and the power of dreaming together. The lake that once seemed to swallow every hope now cradled a legend that shimmered under the moon and roared under the sun. And so the story drifts on, through every ripple of water, every beat of a drum, every soft laugh carried on the night breeze. The city's spirit whispers, "We rose from mud and dreams, and we will rise again, forever." If you close your eyes now, you might still hear it, that quiet, steady heartbeat echoing across time, calling you to remember that even in the softest reed, there is a promise strong enough to reach the sky.